Salvete, and welcome back to Weekly Roman History, where I cut up the story of Roman history into small enough chunks that you can sneak them out of the Ancus Marcius under your togas. This is the third video in the series and the second on the Roman monarchy. Roman history as a whole can be divided into three eras: monarchy, republic, and empire. The monarchy is the earliest period, when Rome was ruled by a succession of 7 kings. The republic is the middle period, when Rome was an oligarchy ruled by the noble classes with some input from the masses, and the empire is a reversion to the monarchy by a different name. The monarchy can reasonably be divided in two as well. The first 4 kings were Roman, or Roman-ish at least, and the last 3 were Etruscan. We dispatched with the first king in the last video. His story is much longer than the others. In this video, we will cover the remaining 3 Roman kings, and leave the foreign kings for next week. A reminder that we are still in the legendary period of Roman history. The monarchy and early republic were all prehistorical. The first Roman histories wouldn't be written until centuries later, after the stories had been twisted through centuries of oral tradition. It's certainly possible that some or all of the 7 kings of Rome were based on real people, but almost certainly none of this happened exactly as I'm describing it. My biggest source for today's story is still the late 1st century BCE historian Livy, whom I introduced in the previous video. There are other contributions, especially from the Greek historian Plutarch in the Numa Pompilius story. I don't have any content warnings for this video. To review, Romulus founded the city of Rome on the blood of his brother, and expanded it through a series of wars, most notably with the Sabines after he stole their women. Finally, Romulus was murdered by the Roman Senate, the 100 noblemen he had convened to advise him. Because Romulus had no sons and left behind no provision for an heir, there is no rule or precedent by which the Romans can select their next king. The Senate decides to vote, and wouldn't you know it, it's a 100-way tie. All 100 senators vote for themselves. In real life, it would never be that tidy, but the story is a humorous reflection on the self-serving nature of politicians. As a compromise, the senators decide to take turns. Each senator gets to rule for 5 days at a time before handing it off to the next one. It's even more complicated than that. The Roman senators and Sabine senators are super suspicious of each other, so they separate each day into 4 periods of 6 hours, and Roman and Sabine temporary kings trade off throughout the day, so that every day has both a Roman and a Sabine king. This lasts for a year, and it's as chaotic as it sounds. It's called an Interregnum, and each senator serving as temporary king is called an interrex, literally something like between king. The people complain that they've exchanged one master for 100, and demand to go back to having one king. The Senate argues some more. The Sabines want a Sabine king, because they only had 5 years of Titus Tatius, and 30 of Romulus alone, so it's their turn. The Romans don't want to hear it. The Sabines got Roman citizenship on equal footing with their conquerors, and now they want to be in charge too? Finally, the name of Numa Pompilius comes forward, and he's such an obvious choice that no one can object.
Come on, people now, smile on your brother, everybody get together.
Numa is not a senator. He's a Sabine, a man known for his learning, wisdom, and piety. His wife was the daughter of the Sabine king Titus Tatius, though she died before Numa's reign started. A persistent legend has it that Numa was tutored by Pythagoras. You know, the theorem guy, the one with the triangles? He isn't just a name from your math class. He was a Greek philosopher and mystic, with theories about a lot more than just triangles. But Pythagoras, who was definitely real, lived about a century after Numa, who was almost certainly fictional. So that story doesn't really check out. In any case, at the time the Roman Senate unanimously votes him in as king, Numa Pompilius is living as a sort of hermit philosopher out in the countryside near the Sabine city of Curiatii, communing with nature and solving problems people bring him. A delegation from the Senate comes to him, and it takes a lot of convincing to get him to accept the throne. He loves peace and religion. Power does not appeal to him, especially not power over a city known primarily for war. But he takes on the challenge, and he immediately begins to accustom the warlike Romans to a life of peace. He sets up the whole religious life of the kingdom. He starts with the temple to Janus, the god with one face in front and another in back, who has to do with beginnings and endings and transitions and gateways. The temple to Janus has a set of ceremonial doors, which Numa declares will be open in times of war and closed in times of peace. Closed when the Romans are safe and secure, open when they need to let out the troops to fight. He settles any outstanding disputes with Rome's neighbors to guarantee the peace, then shuts the doors of Janus. The doors remain closed for Numa's entire reign, but afterward they are very rarely closed. After Numa's successor opens them, they don't close again for another 400 years. Another priority of Numa is the cult of Terminus, the god of boundaries, which is actually fairly similar to Janus's role. Notice that Numa prioritizes boundaries. His belief is that boundaries create peace. Romulus had city walls, but not boundaries. He let his people use whatever land they needed, and if someone didn't like it, they could go to war about it. Numa sets about establishing boundaries. If you are clear on your boundaries and respect those of others, then conflict is less likely. If you take that as a metaphor for your emotional life, there's an important life lesson in there. Numa also moves the Vestal Virgins from Alba Longa to Rome, which contradicts the idea of the traitor Tarpeia in the Romulus story being a Vestal. Numa creates the Solii, the leaping, dancing priests of Mars. There are a ton more temples, priests, and ceremonies that Numa is credited with starting. It's not my aim to recite all of them. But, sidebar on Roman religion. One of the things our sources say is that Numa forbade anyone to represent the gods as humans or animals. The gods are so much higher than humans that they are incomprehensible to us, and it is wrong to represent beings of a higher plane in terms of a lower one. This will come as a surprise to students of Greco-Roman mythology, who have definite faces and personalities associated with names like Jupiter, Juno, Mars, Neptune, or Venus. The disconnect is that when we study Roman mythology, we are studying the Hellenized Roman deities. Greeks depicted their gods in very human terms, with human faces, virtues, and faults. At a later point in history, Rome adopted portions of Greek mythology, taking the personalities of Greek deities and mapping them onto corresponding Roman ones. So a character like Jupiter, who is probably some form of skyfather in original Roman religion, takes on the personality of the Greek Zeus, whom he may or may not have resembled before. And someone like Terminus, who had no Greek equivalent, remains the mystical, personality-free force of Numa's day. Roman state religion evolved and changed constantly through the 1,000 years of Roman history, until it was discarded in favor of Christianity in the last century of Rome's existence. And inconveniently for us, later Roman historians projected their contemporaneous religious beliefs backward onto the people they described, hence the very Greek-like approach to Mars's role in the Romulus and Remus story. So we will probably never know the full nature of the early Roman religion that is so central to the reign of Numa. We do have hints, though, that it is considerably more mystic and animist than the later beliefs we think of when we think of Roman religion. Now Numa, who is a humble and pious man, certainly does not take credit for all his religious achievements. He says that he leaves town every night to visit a sacred grove, where a nymph named Egeria tells him everything the gods want him to do. His wife died years before he became king, and he never officially remarried. He has a sort of celestial marriage with this minor goddess Egeria. He is only a vessel for the gods' divine work, not a brilliant leader in his own right. Whatever he's doing, it works. The Roman people change their warlike ways and give themselves over completely to religion. The neighboring people start to respect and admire Rome, where before they scorned them as a bunch of barbarians. In the eyes of others, Numa converts Rome from a military encampment to a city. That involves more than just religion. Numa is also credited with turning the people to agriculture for the first time. There's a big difference between herding and farming, a connection with the land that Numa believes encourages peace. He sees the problem of the Romans and Sabines considering themselves separate peoples, and his solution is to create other sorts of organizations, trade guilds, social clubs, and the like. By bringing people together into smaller groups based on similar interests, he erodes the differences between Roman and Sabine and unites them into one people. By the way, the curly stick you see in just about every image of Numa is called a lituus. It's used for augury. You look through the loop at the birds. It's a common Roman symbol of religion, kind of like the cross for Christians. Keep a lookout for it, because you'll see it a lot in Roman iconography. Numa rules for 43 years before dying at around the age of 80, a peaceful death for a peaceful king. Numa's reputation, as you can tell from this video, is basically sainthood. He is held up as an ideal of perfect government for future Roman leaders to strive for. To strive for, but not to achieve, mind you. The Romans do still love a war, and real-life leaders who tried to be as peaceful as Numa would find a senate and people itching for some conquest. As a narrative device, since we are in the realm of fiction, Numa serves as a foil, a contrast against Romulus who precedes him and Tullus Hostilius who succeeds him. These two kings are both restless and warlike, and Numa is at the opposite end of the scale, an example of perfect peace to temper them. So, what does Rome do after being ruled for 4 decades by a personification of perfect peace? Elect Tullus Hostilius, a personification of total war, of course. It is convenient that his last name, Hostilius, reminds us of the word hostile, so we can remember him as the warlike king. Tullus's grandfather was an important general of Romulus named Tullus Hostilius, who in one tradition was actually the husband of Hersilia who stopped the Sabine War instead of Romulus. Tullus thinks that Rome has grown weak and lazy under Numa, and is eager to drum up some wars to sharpen them up. He is quick to throw open the doors of Janus and start a war with Alba Longa. This is kind of a mixed thing for the Romans. They want to expand, so they want to conquer Alba Longa. But these two cities have been allies for a long time now. Alba Longa was the birthplace of Romulus and Remus, and they've maintained trade and intermarriage for years. So the Romans are getting ready for battle and feeling uneasy, and the Alban dictator, who has the improbable name of Mettius Fufetius, comes to King Tullus Hostilius with a proposition. He points out the Etruscans, a people to the north who are larger and more powerful than either Rome or Alba Longa and eager to conquer their territory someday. If the Romans and Albans fight, they'll surely kill a huge amount of each other's soldiers, leaving the victor ripe for conquest by the Etruscans. So he proposes an alternate way of solving the war. Both the Romans and the Albans have a set of triplets in their armies, a pretty rare thing at that time. Mettius Fufetius, can't get over that name, proposes that the triplets fight each other. The winning triplets will determine which city will take over the other without need for further bloodshed. Tullus agrees. They draw up treaties, and everyone gets ready for a triplet battle. On the Roman side are the Horatii, that is, 3 triplets with the family name Horatius. On the Alban side are the Curiatii, all named Curiatius. The rest of both armies gather around to watch the fight. After a while, things don't look too good for the Romans. 2 of the 3 Horatii are killed, and all 3 Curiatii are still alive. But there's hope. The remaining Horatius is not wounded, and all 3 Curiatii have been hurt. One has a light wound, one has a more serious one, and one is pretty bad off. So the one remaining Roman Horatius looks around at his foes and does what any courageous Roman would. He runs! He runs and he runs and he runs, and then he turns back and sees exactly what he expected to see. Each of the Curiatii has chased him, but because they were all different amounts of wounded, they're now in 3 different spots behind him. Instead of having to fight all 3 at once, now he just has to fight the lightly wounded one who has kept pace with him. He fights off that Curiatius, kills him, and moves along to the next one. He kills him, then runs to the next one and finishes him off. He wasn't going to make it anyway. Rome wins and conquers Alba Longa thanks to Horatius, a soldier who knows how to use his brain as well as his strength. Our primary source quote comes from this story, as relayed by Livy. Livy has the last Horatius say this right before he kills the last Curiatius. Duos fratrum manibus dedi, tertium causae belli huiusque, ut Romanus Albano imperet dabo. 2 I gave to the spirits of my brothers. The 3rd I will give for the sake of this war, so that the Roman may rule the Alban. Here our fictionalized Horatius turns the killing of his foes in battle into a religious rite, a sacrifice, or a grave gift. He sacrifices 1 Curiatius to the spirit of each of his dead brothers, then sacrifices the 3rd to the cause of the war. It's interesting to see the lines between war and religion blurred in this way, particularly in the reign of Tullus Hostilius, who cast aside the religious duties of Numa Pompilius in favor of war. As an epilogue to this story, Horatius comes home after his triumphal parade and finds his sister weeping. She had been engaged to marry one of the Curiatii, and her brother had just killed her fiancé. I told you the Romans and the Albans were close. But don't worry, it gets worse. Horatius kills his sister on the spot, declaring that it is improper for a Roman to weep over a dead enemy. To their credit, the Romans don't like this one bit, and he is put on trial for murder, and weirdly, treason. He is convicted the first time, then later forgiven on an appeal, just because he's a war hero, not because they decide what he did was okay. Mettius Fufetius, former leader of Alba Longa and now an underling of Tullus, attempts to betray the Romans in a later war. When the Romans win anyway after an exceptionally bloody and difficult battle, Tullus punishes Mettius for his treachery by pulling him apart between 2 4-horse chariots. Apparently it's such a disturbing spectacle that the Romans never do it to anyone again. Then the Romans totally demolish the city of Alba Longa, but they don't kill the Albans. They bring them into Rome as equals like they did the Sabines. Thus falls the great city of Ascanius, and Rome's population doubles. Tullus adds a bunch of Alban elders to the Roman Senate, and since the larger Senate needs a larger place to meet, builds them a new Senate house. This is the Curia Hostilia, which was the Senate's meeting house for the next 500 years or so until its destruction in 52 BCE. The Curia Hostilia is one of the reasons modern historians think Tullus Hostilius was probably the name of a real early Roman king, though the stories about him are probably fictional. Under Tullus, Rome is a violent and turbulent place again, and neither the king nor the people give the gods the same reverence they did under Numa. Tullus especially thinks that worship is beneath the dignity of the king. But then a plague strikes Rome, and Tullus changes his mind when he falls ill himself. He tries to do a ritual to purify himself and Rome, but he gets the steps wrong and is struck by lightning. How's that for a sign from the gods? Tullus dies and his house burns to the ground, ending his reign after 32 years. As a character, Tullus is an obvious contrast to Numa and a double for Romulus. Numa and Tullus represent opposite halves of the Roman psyche, the peaceful philosopher king and the heedless conquering barbarian. What Rome needs is a balance. The people, consulted by the Senate, next choose Ancus Marcius, who is the grandson of Numa Pompilius, as a way to get back to the peaceful ways of Numa. I always call Ancus Marcius the Goldilocks king. Numa was too peaceful, and Tullus was too warlike. Ancus is just right, a blend of the warrior and the statesman. He immediately reinstates the religious rites that had been neglected under Tullus. The Roman people are happy to settle back down into a life of peace. Someone else is happy to see the regime change too. The rest of the cities of the Latin tribes have watched Rome's rapid expansion with worry, and they're hoping this new peaceful king will be easy to conquer. They start to invade some of Rome's land. Ancus goes through a bunch of special religious rites to declare war using special priests called the fetiales, who are half priest, half ambassador. Then he fights a difficult war with numerous Latins. He wins decisively, adding more land and more people to Rome. He is credited with expanding Rome's territory to the sea. He is supposed to have founded Ostia, which was Rome's port city on the mouth of the Tiber River. A seaport is an obvious sign that Rome is growing into a larger international player. There's trade and travel with the larger world going on now. Ancus is also given credit for building the first bridge over the Tiber, the Pons Sublicius, which for religious reasons was constructed only of wood with no metal of any kind, not even nails or other fastenings. The bridge is necessary because Ancus expands the city across the Tiber for the first time, to the Janiculum Hill, which is not one of the famous 7 hills. Then, because Ancus is the king of balance, he settles in and has a peaceful 24-year reign. He's the best of both worlds, excellent in war when provoked, adds greatly to Rome's territory and population, preserves the peace when war isn't needed, and keeps religion well observed throughout. Those are our 3 kings this week. Numa Pompilius the peaceful, Tullus Hostilius the warlike, and Ancus Marcius the balanced. After Ancus is another kind of king, an immigrant from Etruria who, along with his descendants, will bring about huge changes in Roman government. Next week, we will finish the monarchy with the last 3 rulers, the Etruscan kings. See you then.